That right to instruct and correct children comes from God through Jesus Christ. Husbands also have the authority to instruct and correct their wives. That's what it says. All in authority over me, I must submit to their good instruction and correction with due obedience. And husbands have authority over their wives. Now, the nature of the instruction and correction, of course, differs from that given to children, because you're dealing with adults, obviously enough. You're dealing with someone who is one flesh in the Lord, so you physically chastise your children, but you don't beat your wife, obviously enough. This means that husbands are the head of their wives, and therefore can and ought, in appropriate circumstances, to instruct and correct their wives. This means that husbands do not automatically go along with everything their wife tells them. They don't. They ought not. If your wife says or does something that is wrong, some gossip, let's say, or being petty, then the husband is commanded by Jesus Christ to correct her with wisdom and love and say, look dear, you don't know what you're saying. You're like Job's wife at this point, one of the foolish ladies. You ought to be quiet here. This isn't right. And explain things to them. Calm them down. Church leaders too have authority from God to teach. To teach. There are three great spheres of authority given to the Christian church. There's a teaching authority, especially through the office of minister. There is a ruling authority, especially through the office of elder. And there is an official authority to administer mercy, especially through the office of deacon. The church leaders have authority to teach through the preaching of the word and the admonition of elders especially. Those two things are the ways in which Jesus Christ governs and rules his church. That's it. Centrally. Church leaders also have authority from God to correct, whether that's a quiet word, uttered at the appropriate time and in the right manner, or ranging even to formal discipline if necessary. And all of this must be in accordance with Scriptures, which are summed in our minor and major confessions. Going more briefly over some of the remaining authority figures, your employer has the right to instruct you and command you at your work. He does. Your teacher has the right to set you homework and admonish you for sloppy work. He or she does. The state has the right to set taxes. To set taxes, especially, this is where it cuts us, that hit us in areas where we're going to be spending money. We may not think it's a good tax. We'd love them to tax something else, but they have that right. And they have the right to take you to court and imprison you if you don't pay your taxes. Even if they're using that money to engage in wars that you don't agree with, to murder babies, through abortion, to do all sorts of evil things, they have the right to take your taxes. This is the teaching of Romans 13 verses 6 and 7. You can get verses, many of them in Romans, that teach justification by faith alone. And we have in Romans 13 verses 6 and 7, pay your taxes. For this cause pay ye tribute also, says verse 6. Tribute's another form of tax. For they are God's ministers. The taxman's God's minister, attending continually upon this very thing, and they do attend continually on it too. We all know that. They attend continually, and they're God's servants when they do it. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, other words for taxes, and then also not just pay your taxes, but fear to whom fear, honour to whom honour. Now the Catechism says, I must submit myself to the good instruction and correction of those in authority over me with due obedience. Good instruction and correction is used here. And if we think about it, and if we think of all the various people whom God has put over us, we will have to admit, I dare say, that most, if not all, at the very least, most of the instruction and correction we receive from those over us is good. From our teachers, employers, from the state, and so forth. Most of it is good. Now, good here doesn't mean that God approves of it and reckons it a good work, but it is good. Good for us. When they make laws in their sphere, good in that we can see, well, this ruling is at the very least reasonable or makes sense, or we can see why they're doing it. And at the very least, compliance with this rule is not sinful. We may not think it's a good idea. We may have arguments why we think it's not a good idea. But at the very least, they are instructing me and correcting me, and they're not requiring me to sin. Then my calling is submit. The English word submit is very similar to the Greek word submit we looked at a few weeks ago in midweek Bible study. Submit in the English means send yourself under. Sub means under. Submarine, under the water. And mit comes from send, like missionary. Send yourself under them, deliberately, consciously, continuously. You think, I am under this person. You think when you see your parents, I am under them. You think when you see your husband as a wife, I'm under that person. That person's my head. And I will be under that person till death us do part. I am under my employer, and when he makes a ruling that I don't like, I send myself under him. And then I'm no longer under him when that contract or term of employment ends. I am under Prime Minister until, of course, he's voted out, if that's what happens, or if he dies or is invalid. I am under the person in their office. And I am under also that person's instruction and correction. So I put myself under the instruction, I put myself under it so as to obey it, so long as it is good, good instruction and correction. And that is, so long as it is good in the sense of not per se sinful. And if it's not good, then I will still be humble and submissive to the person and explain graciously and humbly why I can't comply with it. But I can't obey a sinful command. Then if you're asked to do something which is sinful, you reply with the Apostle Peter, I must obey God rather than man. Now you know and feel that submission and obedience is not easy. Submitting to the person in their office is okay, for the most part, so long as that person does not tell me what to do. I can submit to someone who is in an office over me that I see, never see him, never tells me what to do, we never have any run-ins, dead easy. Then it gets harder when the person instructs you. You find it harder to submit to the person's instruction, especially if what he calls us to do is difficult or runs counter to our inclinations. That's more difficult. It gets even harder when we are called upon to submit to that person and his instruction and their correction.